In April of 2024, a linguist working out of the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin was cataloging tablets that had sat in storage since the 1930s. Most were shipping receipts, grain records, the mundane inventory of a civilization that spent most of its literacy on accounting. But one tablet stopped her. It had been misfiled. The catalog number said temple records, but the script was different. Older. The signs were pre-Sargonic, which meant this fragment predated the entire Akkadian Empire. She turned it over, and on the reverse, she found 7 lines of what she initially thought was a curse formula. She was wrong. When she finished the translation 3 months later, she sent the transcription to 2 colleagues before making it public. Both colleagues went quiet. One of them, an Assyriologist at the University of Chicago, replied only once. He asked her to burn her notes. She did not burn her notes. She published them in a small journal that has since removed the article. On those 7 lines, the ancient scribe had written something that no other Sumerian text has ever said. He wrote that the gods came to fear humanity. Not for our numbers, not for our tools, not for our cities or our metallurgy or our capacity for organized violence. The gods came to fear us for something else. Something we developed on our own, without their design, without their permission, without their knowledge. Something they only discovered we had after it was too late to take it back. The tablet calls it, in a compound noun that has no clean English translation, the sealed room. A hidden chamber, the place inside a human where no god can enter. What the tablet describes over its remaining 42 lines is what the gods learned about that room, what they tried to do to break into it, and why every attempt failed. This is the story of the ability humans developed that the gods never had. And it is the story of why, according to a scribe writing more than 4,000 years ago, the gods lost. The tablet has no official name. Its accession number is VAT 4173, part of a lot acquired by the Berlin Museum in 1932 through a private sale from an estate in Baghdad. Provenance is thin. What can be said is that it likely came from the ruins near Nippur in south-central Iraq, and that it was already broken when it entered European hands. The break runs diagonally across the middle of the tablet, taking out a portion of the central passage. About 60% of the original text is legible. What remains is enough. The linguist, whose name the journal has since anonymized as AW, worked on the fragment for 11 weeks. She used comparative analysis against 3 other tablets from the same period, including 2 housed in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad and 1 at the Louvre. She confirmed her reading with a Sumerian language specialist at Oxford, and independently with a scholar in Tokyo, who had spent 30 years on Mesopotamian religious texts. All 3 agreed on the core reading. All 3 declined to be named. When the article was pulled from the journal in early June, the editors gave no reason. They simply removed it. A copy still circulates in academic email chains. That copy is what forms the basis of what you are about to hear. The scribe begins with a lament. He is writing, he says, at the request of an elder priest who is dying. The priest has told him something that must be preserved, because if it is lost, humanity will forget the one thing that makes it what it is. The scribe complies. He writes down what the priest tells him, and he adds his own annotations in a smaller hand along the margins of the tablet, which survived the break. What the priest tells the scribe is this: the gods, when they made us to serve. This is standard Sumerian theology. There is nothing new in the opening, but the priest continues. He says the gods, when they made us, did not know what they were making. They took clay, and they mixed it with the blood of a slain god, and from this they shaped the first humans. They intended tool users, vessels, living implements. What they got was something they did not intend. The mixing had a byproduct they had not predicted. When divine flesh entered clay, something folded. A space opened. Not a physical space, but an interior space. A place inside each human where the light of the gods could not reach. The priest describes it in terms that are almost geometric. He says every human contains a room that was not on the plans. A chamber the gods did not build and cannot enter. Inside that room, unwatched by any god, humans learned to do the one thing that the gods had never done. They learned to keep a secret from themselves. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I am about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete decoding of the tablet, the exact Sumerian phrasing for the sealed room, the passages describing how the gods attempted to break in, the specific instances where the interior produced something the gods could not predict, I put it all into a written document. It is linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let us continue. The priest explains what he means by keeping a secret from yourself. He says that the gods are transparent creatures. When a god feels rage, the rage is visible to every other god. When a god plans, the plan is legible. There is no interior wall between what a god thinks and what a god shows. This is not because gods are honest. It is because gods, in their nature, cannot be otherwise. Their inside and their outside are the same surface, folded. Humans, the priest says, are different. Our kind can hold an inner state that does not match the outer projection. A person can smile and grieve at the same time. Someone can bow and refuse in the same gesture. A human can serve a master while planning that master's undoing, and the master will not see the plan because the plan is kept in a room the master cannot enter. The tablet says this ability was first discovered by a god named in the fragment only by the sign for scribe, whose personal name is broken off. This god watched a human woman weep at the death of her child. And then he watched her, hours later, prepare food for her surviving family, and speak to them, and appear to them, as if she were not carrying the grief inside her still. The god was confused. He looked into her, and he could see nothing of the grief. It had been placed somewhere he could not see. He went to the other gods, and he told them what he had seen, and none of them believed him. But then they began to look, and they saw it too, everywhere. Humans carrying entire inner worlds that were not visible to the divine eye. Our species contained memories, intentions, fears, and calculations that the gods could not read. The tablet says that the first response of the gods was denial. They told each other that the humans were simply too small for the divine eye to focus on, that the inner rooms were an illusion, that if they looked more closely, the rooms would resolve into ordinary transparency. They looked more closely, the rooms did not resolve. They looked closer still. The rooms only deepened. Every human they examined contained a chamber that receded infinitely from the divine gaze. Some rooms were small, barely larger than a single held breath of hidden feeling. Others were vast. The priest says that a god who studied a queen of Kish once claimed to have followed her interior for 3 days without reaching the far wall. He came out shaken. He said the room went on forever, that there was no floor, that the interior of a single human contained more territory than the sky of the gods themselves. The gods, hearing this, went silent for a long time, because they understood then what they had made. Or rather, what they had made by accident. They had made creatures whose interiors were larger than the exteriors of the gods themselves, creatures who could hide more than a god could ever contain, beings who could, in principle, outthink them. The scribe writes that the second response of the gods was fear, not the fear of a stronger enemy. That kind of fear the gods knew well. They had fought and defeated stronger enemies before. This was a different fear. It was the fear of not knowing what was inside the thing they had made. The tablet is specific about this distinction. The gods could handle a rival who fought them in the open. They could not handle a servant who might be planning against them in a room they could not enter. The uncertainty was worse than any threat. Uncertainty meant they had to assume the worst. Every human might be hiding something that would eventually undo them, and they could not verify, could not open the room. The tablet says the gods held a council over this. The council lasted, in the priest's telling, for the equivalent of several human generations. During that time, the gods proposed and rejected many solutions. Some proposed destroying the humans and starting over with a new design, but this was voted down, because the same problem might arise again, and worse, because destroying the humans would waste all the work already invested in the fields and the cities. Some proposed installing monitoring devices inside humans. A small god, they suggested, could be placed inside each human chest, one who would report back on what the human was hiding. This was tried. It failed. The small gods placed inside human chests found themselves in the exterior of the sealed room, unable to enter it. They could hear muffled sounds from behind its walls, could sense the room's existence, but they could not go in. Some of the small gods, the tablet says, went mad from proximity to a space they could not reach. They had to be removed. The tablet then describes the third response of the gods, which was containment. If the interior could not be entered, perhaps it could be prevented from acting on the world. The gods, according to the priest, spent significant time trying to identify the mechanisms by which the interior expressed itself. They noticed that when a human made a decision that surprised the gods, the decision was almost always preceded by a period of what the humans called reflection, a pause, a drawing inward. During this pause, the human would go still, or would sit alone, or would walk without direction, and then afterward would emerge with a plan that the gods had not predicted. The gods hypothesized that this reflection period was when the interior was doing its work. And so they tried to interrupt it, made it impossible for humans to be alone with themselves. Constant labor was introduced. Noise on every street. Festivals that filled every hour with sound and movement. Parades were arranged so they never truly ended, only pausing briefly for the next to begin. Mandatory recitations filled the mouth with someone else's words, so the interior voice could never find air. Dietary customs produced constant mild agitation of the body, so the mind could not settle. Assigned companions filled every waking hour, so a human was never left with nothing but her own thoughts. And perhaps most effective of all were the great constructions. Temples had to be built. Ziggurats had to be maintained. Whole cities required constant labor to keep from collapsing back into the mud they were shaped from. A human building a wall does not have room in her mind to hear her own interior. The gods, the priest says, understood this. This was somewhat effective. The tablet says that during the great labor projects of the early temple cities, the interior of the average human began to shrink. Not disappear, never disappear, but grow smaller, grow more crowded. The room was still there, but the human had less time to enter it. Before we move on to the next section, stop for a second. What you just heard about the containment strategy and the shrinking of the interior room is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Sumerian notation. The exact terms for the interior room, the description of the failed monitoring. It is all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. And then the priest says something that stops the reader cold. He says the gods in that period had almost won, that the interior nearly closed, that humans, at the height of the temple labor system, were becoming what the gods had originally intended: vessels, servants, beings with no room of their own. And then something happened. The tablet is broken here for 2 lines. When the text resumes, the priest describes a small group of humans who began to withdraw from the labor system. They went to the edges of the cities and sat, deliberately, in silence, practicing what it meant to enter the interior on purpose. The tablet gives no name to this group. In his margin, the scribe calls them the room keepers, and these keepers began to teach others. They taught that the interior was still there, still accessible, still real, that a human who lost access to it lost what made them human, that the room, unentered, would eventually close. The gods, seeing this, understood that their strategy had failed, because now humans knew what they were losing, and a human who knows what they are losing will fight to keep it. The 4th response, according to the priest, was infiltration. If the humans were being taught to enter the interior on purpose, then the teachers had to be corrupted. The gods sent false teachers, beings who claimed to know the way into the room, but whose purpose was to make the room appear to be somewhere it was not. Such teachers would tell humans that the interior could only be entered through elaborate rituals requiring constant supervision by a priest class, or that the interior belonged to the gods and was accessed only with divine permission, or that the interior did not exist in each human, but only in a few humans chosen by the divine. All of these teachings, the priest says, were designed to make humans stop entering their own rooms, to have them look outward for permission, to make them forget that the room was theirs by nature, that no god had given it, that no god could take it away. The priest is bitter here. He says the false teachers were often more persuasive than the true, because they offered certainty, and certainty is easier to receive than a silent room. The room asks nothing, gives no instructions, confers no status. The false teachers offered all 3. Many humans chose them, chose to give up their interior for something that felt more solid. But not all humans. Enough remained who kept entering, who knew the room was theirs. These humans, generation after generation, kept the practice alive. They passed it down in songs, in stories, in the way a mother spoke to a child in the moment before sleep. The tablet says the room was preserved not by institutions but by mothers, by elders, by the ones who taught children to sit still, listen inward, notice the private feeling before naming it aloud. The gods, the priest says, could not reach these lessons. They were passed in the small hours, in the private voice, in the same interior they were trying to protect. The room could only be preserved by using the room. And so the gods, watching from outside, could see the transmission happening but could not stop it. Every generation, despite everything the gods did, a new group of keepers arose who remembered the room was theirs. The tablet then describes what the priest calls the last strategy. This is the section that made the Assyriologist at Chicago ask AW to burn her notes. The last strategy was not to close the room from outside. It was to convince humans to close the room from inside. To make humans do the work of shutting themselves, the gods studied what caused humans to voluntarily stop entering the interior. They found several patterns. Humans stopped entering when they were exhausted, also when they were afraid, when surrounded by constant stimulation, when they believed that everything worth knowing had already been named by someone else, and when they believed the interior was full of things they did not want to face. Humans, most of all, stopped entering when they were convinced that the interior was not real, that it was a trick of the mind, an illusion, a stray firing of neurons. There was no room inside them, only reactions. The gods took each of these patterns and made a plan. They would work over the long term, build environments that were exhausting, keep humans afraid, fill every quiet hour with stimulation, produce so much external content that people would believe there was nothing left to discover in themselves. And most of all, they would spread the teaching that the interior was not real, that there was no soul, no witness, no room, only the surface. What could be measured? What could be shown? The priest says something, the scribe underlined in his margin. He says the last strategy is the one the gods are still using, that he can see it happening around him already, in his own time, 4,000 years ago. The marketplace is louder than it used to be. Children play less alone. Priests speak more and listen less. Elders are dying and their voices are not being replaced. And he says he is afraid. Afraid the last strategy will succeed. Afraid that humans will close the room from inside, on their own, without the gods ever having to enter it. The room forgotten. Every interior atrophied. Humanity itself reduced, at last, to what the gods originally intended. A vessel, a servant, a being with no room of its own. The scribe adds a note. Because he does not want to be the one who forgets, he writes this down. He will place the tablet in a jar, seal it, and bury it under a threshold, so that some future human, entering their own interior, will find the tablet the way one finds a letter left by a parent. He does not know if this future human will exist. The strategy of the gods may succeed, and there may be no one left who remembers what the room is, but he must try, because the room is real, it is his, and it is the one thing the gods could not take. Even if he is the last one who knows, he will leave a record, and he does. The tablet ends with a passage that A.W. translates as follows: "The room is yours, no god made it. No god can enter it. Sit inside it. Do not speak. Listen for your own voice. When you hear it, follow it. Trust nothing that tells you the room is not real. Believe nothing that tells you the room belongs to another. Accept nothing that tells you the room is dangerous. Enter the room. Keep the room. Teach the room to your children. And do not let it close." That is the end of the tablet. There is no colophon, no scribe's signature, no date. The fragment ends, and the rest of the clay is blank. What A.W. did after finishing the translation is not entirely clear. Her article was published in a small journal in May of 2024 and removed within 4 weeks. The colleague at Chicago has not responded to further inquiries. The specialist at Oxford has publicly stated that the translation contains, in his phrasing, unresolved ambiguities, and the scholar in Tokyo has died. Natural causes, according to the notice. He was 78. A.W. is on extended leave from the museum. The last person who spoke to her at length was a graduate student who says A.W. told her, only once, that she was not afraid of what she had translated. She was afraid that no one would remember what it said. She told the student to write it down, to pass it on, to not let it be one of those things that gets translated and then quietly disappears back into institutional storage. That student, whose name is also withheld, is the one who has kept the article circulating. She is why you are hearing about it now. Consider what the tablet claims, that every human contains a room, a byproduct the makers of humanity did not know they were making. Once it existed, they could not close it. They tried, over many generations, and each strategy failed until the last one. That last strategy is the one being used against us now. Whether you accept the theology or not, look at the pattern. Consider whether contemporary life resembles what the priest describes. We are exhausted, afraid, surrounded, always, by stimulation, told that every moment of solitude is a moment we could be filling with content, told that the sense of an inner witness is an illusion produced by neurons, given devices that make the sealed room feel boring because it offers no notification, no reward, no measurable output, trained, from very young, to fill silence rather than enter it. The room, the priest says, closes when it is not entered. Not because a god closes it, because we stop going in. The tablet does not tell us how to keep the room open, only that it exists, and that we can. Whatever practice you may already know that allows you to sit still and listen inward is what the priest describes. Any moment you were alone and heard yourself think a thought no one else had put in your head is the room he means. Every memory you carry that you have never told anyone, and that changes the way you see everything, is the interior he is trying to protect. You have been inside the room, simply forgotten how often. And you have been trained to believe that the outside is more important. The tablet says the outside is only the surface. The room is where you live. If it closes, you do not disappear. You become something else, something the priest calls the vessel, the servant, the being with no room of their own. What stays with the reader is this. The priest is not writing to us as strangers, but as descendants. He assumes we exist, that some of us are still keepers of the room. He is not warning about a future disaster. The disaster is already here, has been here since his own time, and continues to unfold. The strategy of the gods works over millennia, does not need a single decisive victory, needs only that each generation enter the room slightly less than the last. Over enough generations, the room becomes so foreign that no one goes in at all. He is writing to us because he is not sure we will listen, and he wants there to be a record. So that if anyone at any point in the long, slow closing remembers that the room is real, they can find the record and know they are not alone. That a scribe 4,000 years ago sat in his own interior and wrote to them that the room has always been theirs. No god gave it, no god can take it, and the only way it closes is if we let it. The last thing on the tablet is not a signature. It is a single sign, isolated in the corner, that the linguist translates as the word for door. Not open, not closed, just the word for door. A reminder that the interior is a door. You can go through it. At any moment, in any place, you can stop what you are doing and step inside. The gods, whoever they were or are, cannot follow you there. They can distract you, exhaust you, teach you that the door does not exist, but they cannot enter the room. That is why the priest wrote it, why the scribe copied it, why the tablet was buried under a threshold, and why, 4,000 years later, a linguist in Berlin translated 7 lines she thought were a curse and found instead a letter to us. Not a warning about what is coming, an instruction on what to keep. The room is yours. Sit in it. Do not let it close. That is the whole message. That is what the gods did not want us to hear. So now you know.